Welcome to Expired Musings podcast. My name is Ragad.
And my name is Aman, and this is where all our thoughts go to die.
So have fun!
Please do. Welcome back, everybody.
Hi. Anything changed since the last time we were here?
Nothing interesting, I'm sure.
It seems that, the media's taken a pause.
The media.
Nothing new on social... The media! Nothing new on Instagram.
Nothing new in our lives either, as Palestinians.
What is Palestine? What? Is that a country?
Did you say Pakistan? Is that Pakistan? That's what you said, right? Ragad? Pakistan.
Palestine...
We lost the plot again.
We did.
It's been a week since we've spoken to you guys. I'm sure you're wondering, oh no, what happened? This week was so hard without you girls. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. We missed you.
I know you missed us, and I know you missed our rambling of nonsense, but we're here today with no nonsense.
This episode is definitely no nonsense. We have, as we are sure most of you have noticed by now, that our home country, Palestine, is going through a turbulent, to say the least, time right now. We are being prosecuted and murdered as we speak. And this isn't anything new to us, right? To Raghanai, to Palestinians, this isn't anything new. And we had a rough week. This time it was especially brutal. And every time, Gaza gets basically massacred, happens every few years. It's kind of a cycle. We as Palestinians, we grieve. We always grieve. We're always grieving. And the last week, it seemed very difficult for Ragad and I to kind of, as many Palestinians, I'm sure, it's not about us, obviously, but I think it was difficult for both Ragad and I. We agreed that making an episode in our state of mind would have been maybe impossible. I don't know. Maybe Ragad can add to that. It just didn't seem possible at the time. I don't know.
I mean, you're seeing your own people getting brutally attacked and evicted, and it's just depressing, man. You living out here in the West, feeling helpless, and I mean, what do you do when your people are just suffering? You feel a little bit of a guilt, like you should be, I don't know, you should be doing more. And it just didn't seem like the right time to get on here and make a fun commentary on, I don't know. It wasn't the right time, and we weren't in the right mood. And again, it's not about us. We don't want to be disrespectful either. We don't want to come on social media and be like, okay, hey guys, right in between two videos of people getting bombed, and hey, don't forget to watch our or listen to our new episode. It just seemed very out of touch and sensitive. So we held off on it. But I think this specific episode, we want to almost make an ode to Palestine with it. We are Palestinians, so, we cope with how we cope.
Yeah, we decided to call this episode The Palestinian Resistance, and that's for a few reasons. First of all, I just want to talk about the fact that this episode came about by Ragad and I we talked about it for multiple days, discussing it, because something interesting that happens when you're Palestinian and the world is finally paying attention to Palestine more than usual. We get a lot of people saying, are you guys going to make an episode about Palestine? Are you guys going to talk about what's going on? That's weird for a few reasons. I understand the intention. I know it's not malicious. What I think people fail to understand is that this isn't new to us. Being Palestinian, we are born into the Palestinian resistance. Our existence is resistance. And I love that quote. Ragad's smiling at me right now because she knows how much I love it. And we spend our entire lives talking about Palestine and our cause. We never stop. It was strangely off-putting to have people being like, well, now that this is happening, shouldn't you talk about it? And it's I can't explain it. It feels like, did you just realize now that we're Palestinian and that the Palestinian struggle is going on? It's very odd. This, like Ragad said, Expired Musings is our outlet. We use it to our own need, whatever we need, right? Whatever we're interested in. And right now, we are completely and utterly occupied with Palestine, as we usually are. But this time, it's just a little bit more, for obvious reasons. We decided that we're going to make this episode into two parts. The first part, this episode, is going to talk about our personal Palestinian identity, our thoughts and opinions about what's going on, and some things in between. What we're not going to do is talk about history and give you a sob story, because that's what people for some reason gravitate towards. And we're just not going to do that. You can look up the history, it's very accessible, and we refuse to be constant victims. Palestinians are much more than that. And on the second episode, we're going to talk about Palestinian traditions. We both chose a particular topic that we love that isn't usually discussed when it comes to Palestine, because guess what? We're more than just war and death and tears and pain. We are history and tradition and everything in between. And we're radiant. Palestinians and Palestine is radiant. We have tons to offer more than just pain. And that's what we're going to be doing in the second part of this episode.
So I think the main thing that every Palestinian can identify with is the minute you introduce yourself as a Palestinian or that somebody asks you where you're from, it's a political statement. They're going to hear Israel versus Palestine. There's a lot of things I don't know what I'm allowed to say. Whether it's at work, when people question me, like, oh, how do you feel about the conflict? Quote, quote, conflict. Or how do you feel about a certain group of people? And this is my workplace. This isn't me on the streets. This is me trying to be professional and having people like literally just question my existence when I basically grew up here. Like, why do I have to answer you?
Our identity is constantly questioned. You can't just say you're Palestinian without there being like a follow-up question.
Yeah, it's immediately basically looked on with suspicious eyes because, you're labeled as a war country. And that we have so much more to offer. Like the people of Palestine throughout all of it, because it's not just last week that they started to get attacked, and it's not just a year ago that their land was taken. It's been going on for 73 years. And throughout it all, throughout all the trauma and war, they find ways to celebrate and they find life when all we see on the screen is just damage. They make themselves happy. Like they have to, right? They have to keep themselves going somehow. So I think we need to acknowledge that when you look at a Palestinian, don't look at us with pity.
Yeah. I remember when I first came to Canada, I had the Pakistan thing of me being like, I'm from Palestine. They've been being Pakistan, Palestine, Pakistan. I've had a kid in grade 7 tell me, is that a planet? When I told them I'm from Palestine, that was really funny. There is this almost anxiety that we get out in the West when people ask you where you're from because you're worried. People have also, there's this weird tendency. I've had people go, oh, you're from Palestine, eh? What are your thoughts on the situation? And I'm like, you mean the ethnic cleansing of my people? How do you think I feel about that? I'm going to give you a quick guess. I don't fucking like it. We have a joke that we say, it's like when people say, go back to your country. You know how white people, racist white people are like, go back to your country. And the Palestinians are always like, we wish, please let us, we will go. We'll get into all that later, but the anxiety that we feel that I felt here, and I think a lot of Palestinians feel when we identify ourselves, isn't because of shame or a lack of belonging. It's because people, that you can't just say it without people questioning you and your identity. And it's not just here. Back home in Jordan, there was this phase, I would say in the 90s and 80s, due to kind of a civil war between Jordanians and Palestinians. There was this very interesting derogatory term used against Palestinian Jordanians, and it was called the Belgian. So what would happen is a Jordanian would call you, they'd be like, oh, you're a Belgian? And what that meant was Belgium was producing shoes for the Palestinian army. So when you would find bodies or whatever, they'd be identified as Palestinian because of their shoes, because of their Belgian shoes. So, for example, if you were a Palestinian in Jordan, you were stopped by a cop in like the 90s, that happened to a very close person in my life. The cop went to his fellow cop, oh, he's just a Belgian. Like we can give him a ticket. But if he wasn't Palestinian, aka Belgian, then if he was just a Jordanian person, then they wouldn't have ticketed him. I remember very early on in Jordan being like, oh, being Palestinian puts me at a disadvantage in my life. And I even know people that have lied and said that they are Jordanian to make it through, like, to have an easier living in Jordan. So it's everywhere. We have been going through this since we were expelled in 48. Ragan and I want to get on here and talk about some things that we have noticed as Palestinians. And we also want to talk about why this time is different. I think all my fellow not just Palestinians, people that have been advocating for Palestine have noticed that there's something different about this time. And by about this time, I mean about this uproar that we have seen. We have never, in our 73 years of struggle, have seen support like this international type of support. For the first time in history, being pro-Palestine has become mainstream, and it's very important to discuss. So we're going to jump right into it, I think. Ragad, why do you think this time is different?
Basically, we're living in the age of social media, and I think it's a great thing. Social media has its cons, of course, but one of the great things about it is you can't censor the internet. And one main thing right now that's going on is a lot of the youth in Palestine have been using like live streams on Facebook, on Instagram, and they've been exposing the truth without any sort of interference from mainstream media. You know, with Facebook and Instagram and any other social media platform, they do try to shut you down. This isn't a secret. If you are being political against the party that has shares into their company, they will try to cut you off. But again, the internet, you should know by now, the more you try to shut someone down and try to hide a story, the more people are going to be more willing or more determined to post about it. And that's exactly what's happening. It started off with the youths in Palestine using their social media platforms, and then that caught on to the Palestinians in the diaspora. They start to amplify their voices, and it's just been turbulent ever since. I think that with social media right now, like we have all this momentum because it's so easy to share.
It's so easy to access information too, right? It's always in your face. You literally just open up your phone on Instagram and your feed is, you know exactly what's happening in real time, which is amazing. We never had this before. Like traditional media can manipulate the storyline so easily because it's like their own cameraman, their own crew. You know what I mean? But you can't dictate people filming their lives.
I also want to say that recently, I think was it the Al Jazeera headquarters in Gaza got bombed, and that is their main news source to show people what's going on the floor. But social media, everybody has a phone. You can't hide the truth anymore. It's such a great thing to see that finally they're in control of the narrative, because for the longest time the narrative has always been spun that the oppressed are the oppressors, and obviously there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but this is a huge first step, and it's incredible to see all the support.
We have never seen support like this mainstream from celebrities. Man, celebrities were people used to be, the minute you would say you're pro-Palestine, do you remember it was like you basically get blacklisted? I remember, I think in 2014 when Gaza was being annihilated, Sacha Baron Cohen and his wife Isla Fisher, they sent in money to support Gaza. They started a little foundation, I think, something along those lines. And crusty ass Angelina Jolie's dad, he came out and he was like, oh, like they're blacklisted from Hollywood. You'll never make it in this business because they like sent money to Gaza. Like it was like a death sentence to your career. And a part of me is so excited after this because I'm like, I wonder now if it's, saying the word Palestine, maybe now it won't be such a death sentence to your career. I'm really excited about that.
Being pro-Palestinian is literally being pro-human rights at this point. How is it a political statement? Why is it so taboo to say, hey, can you please condone the killing of innocent children, and not have them argue back that, oh, but what about this? But what about your government? But what about? And what people have done recently is turn this whole being pro-Palestinian, anti-killing, just equal rights, treating them like human beings. They've turned it into an all lives matter. Like, how dare you try to even compare the damage? It's not comparable. And frankly, they're under trial for war crimes that no one is putting them accountable for. So, you know what? If social media has to be the way to get around it, so be it.
Adding on to this kind of, to this idea of this time being different, there's this strong movement of decolonization with the youth of today that has been amplified for the last, I would say, maybe 7 years online. And obviously, the movements of decolonization have always been around, but decolonization has been pushed to the front lines due to movements like the BLM movement, or basically human rights activism when it comes to what's happening in Colombia right now, or what's been happening in India with COVID, any of these things, right? People have been seeing the suffering. It's been personal. It's not just a series of numbers or a tally of deaths. It's people that you see on your phone. It's faces to the names, right? For some reason this time it's been led by not just Palestinians in Palestine, but it's become international. And the diasporic Palestinians have been playing a vital role in this new, this is extremely controversial, but I have been personally calling this like the third intifada. And if you don't know what the intifada is, I would say like look it up. But it basically means like the uprising. And the first two intifadas were very much locally in Palestine, right? Our people fighting back and being massacred. But this time it's international. And I mean, people in the Middle East are like, they're like crossing the borders. They're like ignoring country borders, like international borders, and they're just crossing into Palestine. When I say diasporic, by the way, I'm not saying like the Western Palestinians. I'm talking about all of us, all 6 million of us around the world that don't have the right to return, which is another thing that we're pushing for. We're all exhausted. We have a sense of belonging to a country we've never seen, and I think our parents and our grandparents maybe have gotten too tired. They've been fighting for too long. And I think they kind of passed on the torch to us. And we have been set alight by this want and need to belong to our home, to go back to where we came from, be connected and fight along our people back home in Palestine. It's been like incredible to witness. And Ragad and I were talking about this, is this feeling of like helplessness. We've been feeling really helpless out here. And I think that a lot of our fellow Palestinian activists have been feeling a similar way. You're just, like you said, like you're just watching the news and you're seeing your people being massacred and killed and pushed out of their homes and brutalized. And we always see it. But this time, everybody else is seeing it. And then you like look around and you're like, wow, I feel so helpless. And I think that's why we've been protesting and we've been so actively angry this time. You know what I mean? We've been resisting with anger.
100%. Everything that you said. We're angry and we're passionate, and it's really nice to feel validated and to feel like you're not crazy. You're not pushing for this cause that everyone keeps telling you doesn't exist or it's your fault. But to reference back to the diasporic Palestinians, I just want to make note that we've never really belonged anywhere, whether it's in the West. You know, at the end of the day that you're those Arabs to them, or if you're overseas in the Middle East, some places don't really grant you citizenship if you are Palestinian, and some places have, treat you like a second-class citizen. At least it's a citizen at this point, but it is second class.
Hold on, Ragad, didn't your family go to Libya? Why did you guys go to North Africa? That's very funny, because when we were forced out of Palestine, people, went to Jordan, some people went to Lebanon, some people went to Egypt. I don't know why. Raga's family just straight up went to Libya. They said, we're not like the other girls.
I wish I had an answer for you. I actually don't know. Maybe I should ask them. We don't even get a passport. My Canadian passport is the only passport that I have. So yeah, we really weren't like other girls, and we paid the price. So
damn, don't you? You know what? I think this. I'm about to say something that I think a lot of Palestinians will agree with. Do y'all ever? I'm just talking to Palestinians right now. If you're non-Palestinian, please zone out. Do y'all ever just think, damn, I wish my parents would have went to Chile? Do y'all ever think about that? Because I just be sitting and I'm like, wow, we really could have been those Palestinians that went to Chile and were treated with love and respect. Y'all, please look at Chile and the way that they treat Palestinians. Wonderful. We love to see it. And you know what? I feel like I'm not trying to be thirsty on Maine here, but I'm just saying, if I find a nice Chilean Palestinian, imagine me in Santiago just on the beach with my Palestinian Chilean husband living my best life. I'm just saying, a girl can dream.
Not this. No. Out of the podcast.
I usually identify myself. I literally, like, when I talk to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like an angry Palestinian woman. I'm very much an angry Palestinian woman. And I love it. That's my identity. And I usually identify, like I always say, like I'm Palestinian Jordanian, and I've had I've had an individual, a Palestinian individual, who once told me that I'm a sellout for saying that I'm Palestinian Jordanian, and I was like, "Excuse me," and he's like, "Yeah, you're not allowed to say that." And I was like, first of all, hold on. Imagining you halfwit, coming up to me, an intelligent, mythical being myself, and telling me that I can't identify in a certain way. I am Palestinian Jordanian. I don't care what anybody says. And I identify with both in different ways. That's another thing that people try to do. What their idea of what a Palestinian is onto you, that happens a lot. And then another thing that happens in the West, ooh, I don't know if you remember this. I'm going to tell you about this story. I don't even think I ever told you this story.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in university, I was in a club for Palestinian Resistance, and we used to do a lot of like cultural nights and a lot of information nights and stuff like that, right? So our first event that we had of the year, when I was, I think, in fourth year, this girl came in and she looked really confused, but she was obviously Arab looking. So she comes up, and I was running the event with a few friends, and I go up to her and I'm being friendly. I'm like, "Hi, how are you? Like, please, like, come have a seat." And she comes and has a seat, and I asked her what her name is, and she gave me her name. It was an Arabic name, and I was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Oh, are you Palestinian?" And she's like, "Yeah," and I was like, "Oh, girl, like, where are you from?" So usually Palestinians, when we ask ourselves each other where are we from, we're referencing to where your family's from back home, even if you've never been there. So, for example, Ragad, where are you from?
Yafa.
And then I'm from Gadar Khalil. I'm from the village next to Khalil. So we do this a lot, all the time. That's the first question that we ask each other. So I ask her and she goes, "I don't know."
That's so weird.
Right? So I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? And she's like, "My parents never told me." And I'm like, "Why not?" And she's like, "Well, my parents don't tell me anything about Palestine."
What?
So I'm like, "Wait, is this the first time you like learned about Palestine?" She's like, "Yeah." So she came to like an information night at a university event, and it was the first time that she started learning about her own country.
Many questions. What the hell is wrong with her parents? How white? Either it's white. What is the reason? What is the reason?
Yeah, it was very strange. I remember I kind of asked her, and she said that she's like a second generation, like her parents. I think her parents came to Canada when they were very young, and they came straight from Palestine, and they just decided to like kind of pretend like nothing happened. And that story stuck to me, and it bothered me so much. And I remember going home and talking to my brother about it, and him and I still disagree about this. He said, "You shouldn't judge people." He's like, "What if they just didn't want to pass on the trauma? What if they just wanted her to move on?" And I said, "That's not how it works." Saying that you don't want to associate with Palestine, that you don't want to pass on the trauma or the pain, you're letting go of our cause. And if we all do that, then we'll never get Palestine back. I would literally rather die than not pass on my Palestinian identity to my children. Being Palestinian, it isn't just a personality trait, it's an identity, it's a struggle, it's something that we live with every single day. Not having a home, having it being stolen from us, from our parents, from our grandparents. It is ours. Palestine is ours, and we'll never stop until we get it back. Period.
It's not up to you to decide whether your child wants to know about Palestine or not. Like, you didn't even give them that option to even try to understand where they're from. And I think this kind of leads into another point where people always make fun of Palestinians. It's like one of those jokes where it's like, oh, like you meet a Palestinian, how do you know? It's because, they tell you the first before they even say hello, That rhymed.
Wow, is she a poet?
Uh, that was not intentional. Anyways, the run-on joke is Palestinians will always tell you they're Palestinian without you even asking. Some people they like to tease and everything, but I like to remind people we're going through an ethnic cleansing. We have to remind people that we're Palestinian because we have to keep our traditions and culture alive. This is the only way that we can do that here in the West. And for her parents not to even give her that option to decide whether she wants to be Palestinian or not is cruel.
I mean, what's funny about my brother's argument is that it was immediately disproven, right? Because he's like, maybe they didn't want her to go through the trauma. And I was like, "You idiot, what do you think she was doing at this this event?" She was upset that her parents didn't give her information about her own identity. She came to seek it out from a bunch of kids at the uni. So it tells you something, is that her parents stole something away from her. Being Palestinian is empowering. It is not an identity of victimhood. Which brings us to our next topic. There's this weird thing that we see a lot with Palestinians is that we're constantly victimized, right? By the way, we are victims of a colonizing regime, an apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever you want to name it. It's true. But we're not just that. And something that I see a lot and I'm tired of is that people, as they get uncomfortable when we're resisting, right? It's all fine and dandy when we're victims, but when we're resisting, it's not cute anymore. And they constantly want us to talk about our pain, our sob stories. That's something that you see a lot. Is people want you to sit down and say, well, this is what happened. My father was expelled and our family was killed, blah, blah, blah. Me going like blah, blah, is not me dismissing our pain, because it is not just painful, it's horrendous. What we went through is horrendous. What each one of us has a story, and they're all painful. The difference is, it's weird when that's all that people want. You know what I mean? Like, there's this weird thing where like all you are is a sob story, and that is not what Palestinians are. We are, like I said, extremely dynamic, and we see this thing where people get like uncomfortable when Palestinians resist. Not only, we're not talking just political resistance or social resistance. We're talking about Palestinians being like, hey, I'm Palestinian and I'm an artist. I'm a Palestinian and I want to run for Senate. All of a sudden people are like, ooh, they're stepping out of their lane. When you stop being a victim and become something else, people can't take it. There's this weird thing where people just want to usher us back into that victim zone, right? Where you're just talking about your pain and your suffering. But when we want to do something more, we're dismissed. And this is just not just by white people. This is by fellow Arabs. I've seen this happen. There's this weird thing about like misery porn. There's this weird need for it. And we see that a lot, by the way. Like, you hear the same thing about Black people talking about like slavery films, because white guilt brings in a lot of cash. You know, I don't want to get into it, like jails and and the systematic racism. That's all another form of slavery. But what I'm saying is we're much more than that. So when you support Palestinians, support Palestinian artists, support Palestinian writers, Palestinian politicians, Palestinian friends. We are dynamic. We are not just our pain.
Also, when they ask you to tell your sob story and tell the story of how your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents fled Palestine, or they had to deal with the refugee camps, or whatever the situation was, it feels like you have to justify your cause. It feels like I have to almost prove that the Palestinian crisis is happening and that you are oppressed. And that's not fun. And you know what? Most Palestinians don't want to relive the trauma, or most Palestinians don't want to give out intimate details of their family. So stop asking. You know how personal that is? Why would I want to share the story of like my grandparents or my great grandparents and the heartbreak, the isolation, the having to start all over in another country, having to lose everything? Why do you think I want to have that on a casual Tuesday afternoon? Like, what in your right mind do you think I want to have this conversation right now with a stranger? Like, it's not. The other thing is that we don't get any actual support from the Arab community. Sure, we might get like a little bit of a moral support, or we might, people might come out for a protest here and there. But when, like Aman said, it actually matters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because Ragad, in our notes, she put a point that said, Ragad needs to have a quick rant about the uselessness of other Arabs. It was all in all caps. And yeah, I mean, Arab governments have shown zero to no support over the years. It's only gotten worse. We have scarcely seen any support from other countries. And when we have, it's like life-changing. Like, I remember when I was first told that Ireland has like a Palestinian embassy, and I was like, what? That's crazy. Like, they think of us as actual people. Wow. The Irish are still great. But yeah, this is something that we have lived with our whole life. And there's this weird thing where, like, when people kind of question you, every single Palestinian living outside of the Middle East and in areas where you would like meet with pro-Israel individuals, they would ask you the question, like, what do you think of the quote unquote conflict? And I'm like, how do I tell this dumbass that I don't have to have this discussion with you, because the reason I'm here is because we were kicked out? Like, there's something so weird about y'all. There is this, it's like you're in the Twilight Zone. People are like, oh, prove to me that like Palestinians deserve to live. Or like y'all are actually like, like you're actually Palestinian. I'm like, how do I tell this idiot that my dad was pushed out, like he recalls being pushed out of his village and like guns being pushed against their heads? And how do I tell these people that what do you mean? What do you? It's so weird. It's like somebody kicking you out of your house, literally grabbing you, putting you outside, chucking you on the garden, and being like, and you knocking on the door, being like, "Can I come back in? This is my house." And then opening the door and being like, prove it though." And you're like, "I was literally just there." And they're like, "But do you have proof? What about us? We're here now." It's ludicrous to even have like. It's so weird. I feel like I can't. Just my mind was blown by Palestinians that actually sit down and have discussions and like dialogue with Zionists, and they try to like, or people that are pro-Israel, and they try to like actually like, win the arguments and like have conversation. I'm like, I would just be like, no, bitch, I'm not talking to you. You can't, what are you gonna say to me? I'm here because you kicked us out. Like, I want to be back home. What the hell? It's so weird. It's so weird.
Number one, don't ever engage with a Zionist. It's like talking to a wall. It's like they made up their own lies and then they believe in them. So how do you argue with something that isn't reality? How do you tell a person that you're delusional? It's a waste of time. It's a waste of breath. Don't ever bother with it. They have already made their minds up that you're not a human being, that, but your whole city, but your government, uh, am I the government? Why are you attacking me? Why do I have to justify that my life is equal to yours, that I deserve equal rights in this country that I was kicked out of? I hope that people don't misunderstand. When I say anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitic.
Zionism is a movement, right? It's like a belief system. And when you're anti-Zionist, you disagree with the idea of the expulsion of Palestinian people and the Israeli colonization and settling in Palestinian land and naming it an Israeli state. You just don't believe in any of that shit and all that comes with it. Zionism is very complicated, but it all comes down to the idea that Israel is basically allowed to exist and Palestine isn't, and that Palestine belongs to Israeli people.
I recently saw a debate that basically they wanted to pass a law that stated if you are anti-Zionist, you are automatically anti-Semitic. And Mehdi Hassan, he's such a great debater. He literally brought up the point, how dare you tell a group of people who are being oppressed by this government, either you agree with us that you don't deserve to live on this land, or you're racist. How do you tell a group of people that are suffering by your hands you only have these two options? Again, it feels almost you have Canada, you have America, you have multiple other countries all around the world funding Israel, giving them all the money in the world to build the greatest army, to build the greatest military. Meanwhile, we have leftover rockets that people are recycling to maybe use as self-defense. Like, it's not on equal levels at all. And for people to try to even equate that shows how either brainwashed you are or out of touch with reality that you are. What should be said is that the Jewish community, there is a portion of it that disagree with the state of Israel and are pro-Palestinian. So are you going to tell them that they are anti-Semitic?
Yeah, they do. If you guys see the protests where like the pro-Palestine Jewish community comes out and there's like Zionist pro-Israel people and they're like, you're not real, you're not really Jewish. And the Jewish people are like, what? What the hell are you talking about? They're like, you're being anti-Semitic. They're like, how can I, ma'am? Anyways, this brings us to maybe the last bit of this episode. And we want to make it clear that this isn't even like we as Palestinians can sit with you for like a week straight and tell you everything you need to know about the struggle. But that's not what Ragna and I are here for. We wanted to get some things off our chest. We wanted to share with you a few feelings that we have. And lastly, we wanted to give you some sources that you might be able to use. Here are some of our favorites. My favorite Arab writer, I would say, is Edward Said. Edward Said wrote some incredible books that really encapsulate the Palestinian case and struggle. He's incredible and he's an icon. So definitely go ahead and read some of his books. If you want to look at poetry, Mahmoud Darwish is an iconic Palestinian poet. Please look at his work. And if you want to see things that are just, easily accessible on Instagram, you can look at Jewish Voices for Peace. Speaking of Jewish communities being pro-Palestine, they're really, really cool and they have some really cool stuff. You can also follow right now Muhammad Kurd and Mona Kurd are siblings in Sheikh Jarrah who are currently documenting their own expulsion, basically. And they do a lot of lives and great, great representation of what's happening right now. And they're the face of Sheikh Jarrah right now. Ragad, please add some of your own.
Literally any of the Supri Taha videos right now. He's been posting relentlessly on Instagram, maybe like 2-minute videos explaining whether it's the history of Palestine, very condensed, very easy to follow along, what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah, what's going on in Gaza, what's going on with Al Aqsa Mosque, and he breaks it out into a timeline. So a lot of the times the media will just kind of start recording where certain Palestinian government is launching missiles and attacking Israel, but they have not at all referenced what was going on before that caused this reaction. And I do want to say we have been having some protests recently, and there's been a huge uproar, and our voices are finally being heard. One thing to note, and this is just a quick rant, if you go to a protest, please don't take pictures and post it like you're at a photo shoot. This isn't some party, this isn't some tailgating event or a sporting event. This is a genocide that is happening, and this is a movement we are trying to do to reach out to our government. Don't make this about you.
Yeah. As long as we're alive, as long as Palestinian blood courses through our veins, our cause will never die. And Palestine is for Palestinians. Always have been, always will.
There was a really powerful quote. I forget who exactly said it. I think it was an Israeli government member, but basically, the old will die and the young will forget. And there's a point to be made about that. We need to keep our traditions alive, we need to keep our history alive, and we need to pass it down. Don't be like those parents earlier and not tell their child at all where they're from and leave them confused in this Western society. Tell them and be proud of it.
Yeah, I love that. We're hella strong, dude. Like I said, our existence is resistance. And we hope this episode pushed you into some sort of action. And if not, I hope it was a push for you to talk to the Palestinians in your life. So that's it for today's episode. We really hope that you enjoyed it and that you've learned. And please join us next week as we do part 2 of this episode. And please follow us on Instagram and TikTok for more content and more information. I would really appreciate that. And that's it from us, the Expired Muse and Gals. I think we're going to have maybe a more somber goodbye here. So thank you so much and have a good one.
Take care, guys.